Don't tell me that the moon is shining. Show me the glint of light on broken glass. Hello and welcome to Shining Moon episode 35, Writing Fantasy Religions. I'm your host, Deborah L. Davitt. With me today are Samantha Mills and Risa Wolf. Let's get started with some introductions. Samantha Mills is a Nebula Locus and Theodore Sturgeon Memorial Award-winning author from Southern California. You can find her short fiction in Uncanny Magazine, Strange Horizons, Escape Pod, and others, as well as the best of anthologies The New Voices of Science Fiction and the Year's Best Science Fiction and Fantasy 2023. Her debut novel, The Wings Upon Her Back, is coming out in April 2024 through Tachyon Publications. Very exciting. You can find out more at www.samtasticbooks.com. Welcome to the podcast, Samantha. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. Risa Wolf is a multi-gendered water elemental disguised as an ink-stained lycanthrope. They come from the burned-over district in upstate New York, and they imagine houses for book ghosts for a living. Their writing can be found in Apex, Clarkesworld, and Diabolical Plots, among others. Visit them at killerpuppytales.com. That is one of the most unique intros I've ever had the pleasure to read. Thank you so much for being on, Risa.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Really wonderful to be here.
As I said, it's a pleasure to have both of you here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation because I really enjoyed everything that you guys sent me to read. So thank you so much. All right, so let's dive into our general questions. When is it useful to invent a religion? And obviously, we have a plethora of real-world ones that we can turn to, but when is it the most useful to you to invent a religion, and why do you choose to do it? I'm going to obviously just go in the alphabetical order, since I only have two guests today. We can have a nice, in-depth, relaxed conversation with both of you, as opposed to speeding from person to person. So, Samantha, why invent a religion, and how do you go about doing it?
Yes. I think secondary fantasy in particular has this amazing potential to create all of the elements yourself. It's like running an experiment on human nature, but you control every variable.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of those elements that you can use is religion. One reason to focus on it might be that you are examining the underlying mechanism of religious formation or faith itself.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be a little more, like I said, you can control it yourself when you create the framework for it, that it might get a little bit distracted commenting on a real world religion, that it might, you bring in all the baggage of the real world when you're using the real one.
You do.
And it can distract from maybe the element that you're trying to drill down to more hypothetically or thematically.
Okay.
Also, if you have a world that you've created with a very unique speculative element, you get to explore how people react to it. And maybe one of those reactions is the formation of a religion. And so that formation is a way to world build out that speculative element of how people change the way that they live in response to this.
Yeah, and it's not just limited to secondary world fantasy either. I like to introduce religions in alien worlds as well, and just in pure sci-fi or space opera, because they're going to have beliefs, they're going to have structures, they're going to have ways of interfacing with the world. But Risa, how about you? When is it useful for you to invent a religion, and why and how do you do it?
I'm going to follow on to what you said, Deborah, because I'm a very character-driven reader and a character-driven writer. And it always is of the most importance to me to understand what my characters believe and why they believe it. Part of that is, so I usually start with a character and then I drill up from there. It's like, what is the world that this character lives in? What are the religious beliefs or cultural beliefs that are here? And because every culture that we know of on the earth, everybody uses some sort of mythology or belief system to
Mm-hmm.
understand the world around them,
Yes.
or they have had direct interaction with something they believe to be a god or a deity, and that
Mm-hmm.
feeds who they are, right? Like that interaction, whether it is a mythology that they don't have direct experience with, or if they believe they've had direct experience with a deity, that really changes who they are and how they approach the world, and that changes the stories that you tell.
It does. It really does. That's really well put. Thank you. In terms of world building, I find that religion is staggeringly useful because a given religion tells us about the world, about people's relationship to the world and to each other. But what pitfalls do you want to avoid when creating a fantasy religion? And I'm going to bop back to Samantha for that, and I'm going to ask you that question.
Yes, I would say one that I try to avoid is I don't want to incorporate elements from real religion just for flair. If
Mm-hmm.
there's something that parallels an experience I have in real life, I want it to be on purpose, and I want to actually be saying something interesting about that, and yeah, not just not just adding like taking bits and pieces from things without caring about their context in real
Yeah.
world experience and
Yeah,
politics.
that gets us into the whole thorny issue of appropriation anyways, too. So, yeah.
Which is another
Uh,
perhaps reason to create one to begin with, if that is not
exactly,
something that
yes.
you're trying to do, to go back to the first question.
Yeah, absolutely. That does hook back in beautifully. Risa, what pitfalls do you tend to want to avoid when creating and evolving a fantasy religion?
My biggest pitfall is making the people somehow magical, right? Like, because I want to write with people of different cultures, I want to write with people of different skin colors, I need to be extremely careful not
Mm-hmm.
to map people onto inherent biases. And so I do a lot of investigation of what type of cultures I am looking at, as well as the type of stereotypes that can come out of
Yeah,
certain religions. I want to.
yeah.
I read a story recently that had a reference to a religious belief that somebody mapped onto a religion I had no idea that that was part of, and I was like, wow, that was something I didn't even know, and I really should have known that. So those are the types of
Mm-hmm.
things that I really look for. I really keep mental notes on, because I think it is
Mm-hmm.
super important not to make your religion a parody of
Yes.
religions that are out there.
Yeah, and that's so easy to do.
Mhm.
One of my very first world building exercises was for a game world that I developed for my players back in the early aughts. And I went after every bad thing about organized religion that there is in the initial religion that I developed that they were going to be fighting against. And maybe that's not the most nuanced way of going about things. Maybe that's better for a game world than it is for a novel, for example, because in a novel you're expected to have more than one point of view, and you're expected to have more nuance, more depth, more everything like that. Whereas in a game world, you're fighting against an enemy, and it's okay that they're the bad guys. But it's maybe also more nuance is necessary even in a game world. I don't know. It's a question that I have about my past and how I've developed things in the past. So speaking of nuance, how do you bring nuance to religion, even when you want to show that those who followed it have let a greed for power consume them? And that's particularly relevant to Samantha's her novel, which we are going to be discussing in some depth here. So, how do you go about creating that level of nuance between the follower and the belief?
Yes, I think that especially in a long form project like a book, you have the opportunity to have multiple perspectives. You can get that in shorter works, but you really have room to expand on that in a book. And I think it's understanding that no community is perfectly uniform. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if I if I read something and it says everyone in this group believes the same thing in the same way and interprets it the same way and they all follow the rules, I'm skeptical. I don't really believe that.
We're not a
There
hive
somebody's
mind.
lying to you.
Most of us
Yeah.
are not there.
There are going to be people that don't fit the expectations, and so I'm really interested in setting up the expectations first, and then asking who doesn't fit here and why.
I see a cattail on my screen, and it's wonderful.
So even when you have, the written word or the spoken word, people interpret it differently, and that's a way that little divisions form. If there are rules, they're probably in place for a reason, because people are exhibiting behavior that's unwanted. And so you ask, is this a religion that's enforced? Is it something personal, or is it actually at the state level? And if it's at the state level, what are they choosing to enforce and how? Or if it is social, how is it socially enforced? And how is it dealt with when people do not fit into that mold?
Those are all interesting questions. Risa, how do you bring nuance to a religion, even when you want to show that somebody who follows it might not be the ideal person for that faith?
Along with everything that Sam said, because all of that was chef's kiss, right? Like, absolutely. I also understand devotion to be a spectrum. Everybody is, the level at which a person is devout and to which particular deity, if it is a pantheon versus a single deity, how, what gods do they align with more closely? What gods do they pull back from for any particular reason? Who are they devoted to? What is the level of their devotion? And does, like, the types of things, like, does it sink into their dreams? Does it sink into, like, is it a habit? Like, do they pray every morning? Do they genuflect every time they pass a certain shrine? Those types of things are very important to understand, because, a band of explorers might pass a shrine and one person genuflects and another person doesn't even notice the shrine because that's not on their mind. Those are the types of things that you can really dig into in a fantasy religion.
And this is something that is going to come up again in the real world religion episode, which will be later this week and will be sometime in April being broadcast. But I wanted to comment that sometimes in fantasy religions, there is this schism between the good religion, the good God, and the bad God. And that is not necessarily a thing, because I grew up reading fantasy novels that had this divisive sort of schism between the good gods and the bad gods. I knew from reading mythology that Shiva is a bad god. So he's a bad god. He's a god of evil. Therefore, he must be a bad god. So I was 16 years old and I was sitting next to the wonderful Indian girl who happened to be sitting next to me in my class. And I was asking her about her religion. And she says that she was a worshiper of Shiva. And I said, really? But you seem to be such a nice person. That made me being, 16-year-old idiot that I was in the early 90s. And she explained to me very kindly and very gently that when you're propitiating the deity, you're asking him to not do bad things. You're asking him to be merciful, that sort of thing. And suddenly it clicked for me that everything that I had read in all of these fantasy novels was a bunch of tripe, and that it made no sense in the real world whatsoever, and that there was no such thing as a truly evil god. There were just gods that people worship in different ways. And I had a moment of revelation, and it's stuck with me all the way through to this point in time. And I want people to experience that as well. And when they take a look at some of the older fantasy works and the older fantasy religions, and maybe encounter them in a different way going forward. So let's talk about individual books here, or individual stories. We have Samantha's, which is The Wings Upon Her Back. I'm going to give a very brief précis of the book, because I've read the first 50 pages. It's compulsively readable. I want to read the rest of it, but I only have so much time to read each week, unfortunately. I highly recommend it so far as I've gotten, and I really hope that people pick it up when it comes out in later in April, because it's really, as I said, it's compulsively readable. And I didn't want to finish this excerpt because I wanted it to just keep going. But Zemilai is a winged warrior, and her sect, which follows one of the five gods, the Mecha god in particular, has grown increasingly powerful over the course of her lifetime. Where there once was an equality between the followers of the five gods, now there is tyranny, as the Mecha god, the warrior god, is an ascendancy. but how much of that is the power of the god, and how much of that is the political machinations of her followers? And is there a true distinction between the two states? This book asks these questions and more as Zemeli falls from grace into the hands of rebels and slowly begins to take up their cause as her own. So yeah, this was really, really good. I loved the world building that you did. I loved the characterization that you did, all the little parentheticals where she's not allowing herself to think about things. I want to see where that goes. I want to see her actually think the heretical thoughts later on in the book, because I know that's coming and I want to see it happen. So yeah, really deftly written and really interestingly developed. So on what real world religion, if any, is the caste system and the religion of your world based? Where did you draw inspiration from? Or does it wholesale from yourself, from out of your own mind?
It's made up religion. It's not purposefully based on anything, but I do recognize the way that I was raised culturally permeate it. So I can't call it pure neutral. I am not religious myself, but I'm raised in America, which the predominantly Christian culture, even if you don't think of yourself as religious, those values kind of seep in. And I have a lot of Catholic family. So even though I wasn't raised in the church, there's a lot of family and sin and guilt and repenting and guilt. And that gets in there, even so that's in there, but it wasn't meant to be specifically a reflection of that. It's just my understanding of this dynamic of worship and doubt. So I'm really interested in fantasy and the ability to have those gods manifest where you don't actually question their existence because they're physically there and you can see them, and they are these, but they're still a bit inscrutable. You still don't completely understand their motivations and why sometimes they act upon you. And so in this case, a crisis of faith is not disbelieving in them, it's questioning their motivations. And maybe they do not have our best interests in heart, and that humanity loves them so much and is not getting back what they want from them. And so it's the nature of them rather than their existence. And in this case, the gods have gone to sleep, so there are abandonment issues citywide. And it's reflected on the main character's art because she also has a bad case of hero worship for her mentor, who then at the opening of the book has abandoned her as well. And so it's told on those two levels of the personal story, which is the same story that the city has been caught in, this cycle of being disillusioned for generations.
Yeah, it's this lovely intersection. It's this lovely intersection of crises, basically, for the protagonist.
Yeah,
and it creates just such wonderful tension for her. One of the questions that's brought up in the text is who we are. Are we all the people that we've always ever been forever, and are we capable of change? Which is a pretty heavy philosophical question. It's the classic: is the river that you step into yesterday is it the same one as today? Yes, but it's not the same. It's not the same water. It's not the same fish. It's not the same sand. It's not. Is this not the same? It's not the same river. So it's a classical philosophical question, and you pose it right in the beginning of the novel, which kudos to you for dropping the reader right into. You're going to be thinking in this book, by the way. You're going to think. How integral is this question to the religious themes of the five gods in the story itself?
It is. So there are five gods, and they each have their followers that like their teachings the best. And in the wake of that initial abandonment, that the gods went to sleep and they sometimes respond, but not very consistently, each group has dealt with that in their own way. And the warrior group has doubled down. They have decided, we will stick to their teachings. We will make everyone else be correct, because if we are super perfect, we're going to earn their affection back. And so just the ability to change is a core heresy of I don't want to do everything. And so that question is intimately bound up with the main character's arc of, can I still love my God and not maybe do everything they say?
I love that.
And just the ability to question things and the ability to change is sort of where the city needs to head in order to get out of this mutual crisis that they're in, that they're taking out on each other, because everybody blames the other group for it's your fault.
Yeah.
That they turned away.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of othering that does go on, even in that first 50 pages segment that you gave me. And it's beautifully done.
Thank you.
And again, I highly endorse anybody wants to read this. It's coming out later in April from Tachyon Books. Take a look at it. Risa, you have 2 stories for us. And the first one is The First Promise We Break, which appeared in Apex magazine, which we will have links to in the comments. This is a retelling of the classic tale of Cupid and Psyche, but one in which the Psyche figure, Suella, rebels against the edicts of the goddess of love and stands up for herself and her unborn child. I loved the tweaks that you made to this story. It was comfortingly familiar, yet just different enough that I was like, oh, this is new. Ooh, this is new. That's better. I like that so much better. So I'm going to skip to my third question, which is there are familiar fairy tale tropes in this story as well. The 3 impossible and ultimately very degrading tasks that the last of which is subverted completely for the modern audience in terms of the way it's handled, giving her, the main character, her autonomy back. And because she it's the classical clean up this garden without using any tools. Okay, well, she does so. Get across this causeway of boiling water, and she does so by repeating her lover's instructions to her bath water, for example, earlier in the story, and it resets the temperature of the water to being something that she can deal with, and she can create the causeway. Fine and dandy. The third one is people are going to tear your hair out by the roots, one strand at a time, and you're going to just sit there and suffer and take it. And she says, no, I'm not doing this. Oh, well, this is all your vanity. No, it's not. And you are wrong, Miss Goddess. And I loved this. It was such a complete turnaround, and it was such a fresh modern take on it, and it was just wonderful. So why since you're going to subvert it and change it in such a strong and emphatic way, why use the fairy tale structure to begin with?
That's a great question. I very specifically wrote this with a mindset of consent. One of the things about most fairy tales and most mythology in the European, almost all of the Europeans, has a problem where the woman has all of this stuff visited upon her and has no way of fighting back. And even when the 3 impossible tasks are brought to this woman, she is left asking all of these different people to help her. They do it for her. Her relationship, like her niceness and her kindness and her passiveness is what wins. And I was like, I can't do that. I need to show how every single one of these, number 1, she's not passive. Number 2, she has the tools within herself. And the first task was, what can you imagine? What can you bring back in your imagination? That is the one where she cleans the garden. Then there is the what type of things do you keep safe within yourself, right? I'll put it that way.
I like that way. I like looking at it that way.
And that was the second one. Like, that's the bridge, like literal causeway. It's a literal bridge between, you can imagine this, you can, keep yourself safe. And that brings you to the point where you can have the confrontation with your abuser, right? Like, and so I really needed that to, be the sort of like Clarissa Pinkola Estes way of approaching a myth and make it really, really clear and very explicit that Sula always has this in herself. There is nothing that anybody needs to give her. She always had the power.
I like that. I really do. And I like the confrontation with the folklore and everything like that. And again, the subversion is sublime. Thank you. Back to our actual topic. as opposed to my Mutual Admiration Society here. Our actual topic is religion. So why use imagined gods rather than the familiar Greco-Roman ones?
This particular story actually came from a prompt given by a anthology producer. The press is called Air and Nothingness Press, and they did a series called Upon a Once Time, Upon a Twice Time, Upon a Thrice Time. And this was too long for their call, but I wanted to put together Cupid and Psyche and Bluebeard because I always thought that it was sort of a different type of looking at it. Like Psyche is saved not by brothers, but by actual, beings, actual, an eagle, the ants, etc. And I thought I really wanted to see that contrast. I really wanted to see that the Bluebeard victim can fight back and use Psyche to do that. But when I looked into it, I realized there are like a ton. There's so many monster stories, like monster husband stories. And that brought me to this thing in the folklore world called the UTI, and that's not right. That is so not right. Oh so my right, no. God.
Do you want me to bleep that one out?
It's up to you. It's actually a really funny misspeak.
Oh my God.
ATU.
Thank you. The Arnie Thompson Uther Index. Thank you.
Yes, Skip. That's the one.
Yes. Yes. The Arne Thompson Uther Index, which basically gives a sort of librarian view of all of the folklore that exists in Europe and maps them to different topics. And I realized like East of the Sun, West of the Moon, Bluebeard, Beauty and the Beast, Briar Rose, all fit into the same premise. And I was like, I really need to dig into this. So rather than do the Greco-Roman gods, I started looking at the Greek pantheon from the perspective of all of the other pantheons that exist. If I was going to do Bluebeard, what were the Celtic gods? If I was going to do East of the Sun, West of the Moon, what were the Norse gods? And I actually saw this picture of hell drawn with the line straight down the middle. And I was like, that's like Persephone. I realized how similar they were. And so I basically just came up with names that would be Greek enough, but still pull in some of the naming conventions of Celtic gods. Like you'll see it in Calafria, you'll see it in others. That there were some names that had Celtic influence and Norse influence to show how all of these are sort of married across the European peninsula.
Beautiful. I think this is a wonderful, wonderful story. I think that you have embroidered it with incredible detail and a lot of attention to nuance and depth and everything like that. I loved reading this story, and I thank you for sharing it. We're going to move to your next story, which is Delicate Situations, which you'll be doing a brief reading from later. This is in the anthology 99 Fleeting Fantasies. In this story, which is told in a series of memos between priests who serve the primordials, which are gods devoted to internal forces like striving and creation, as opposed to external forces like lightning or earth, a specific priest is asked to stop serving a given goddess so that they can be together romantically. The priest's supervisor wants to decline that request and rather officiously insists on having his way through the memos, in spite of being reprimanded by others in the chain, until the goddess gets wind of his stance and comes for his head. Or at least whatever body parts are left undigested after her shift to tentacular form. I loved this story. This was so much fun. I didn't know where it was going at first, and then I was hooked because I'm like, it's a memo form. This is a little bit weird. Okay, I'm rolling with it. Oh, this is funny. So in terms of religious development, it's interesting that the primordials are the following 3 things. They're capable of romances with humans. So they are deities that can you're touched by an angel. You are you're capable of receiving the divine as a human being. Okay, cool. They are the repositories of human virtues, or perhaps of inhuman virtues, as you've noted to me that the story is set between worlds. So that's pretty darn cool. And finally, they can become tentacle monsters when irritated. So that's just amazing. So what led you to develop them in this fashion rather than after the more conventional external forces, elemental might, blah blah blah? So how did you come about developing them in such disparate but interesting ways and just enmeshing them like this?
Oh, this is a great way of phrasing it. Thank you. The thing that brought this is actually a series. I write stories in this universe, and between these two characters, a lot. I'm really hoping that I can get more of them out there, because I found myself after I wrote First Promise thinking about what, like, okay, well, yeah, there's this god of love. Everybody's got a god of love. There's this god of war. Everybody's got a god of war. What would it look like to say, you know what? Screw all that. Screw all of that. What do people all share? Oh, hey, maybe we're going to go past people because one of the worlds that I'm thinking of that intersects here has no humans, only angels, which are just basically big mucus balls. And places where there are no humans, but there are still sentient beings that aren't humanoid. What does a god look like for that? What does, if beauty wasn't actually a concept? Like, what is beauty for a mucus ball? What would be the concepts that would apply across the board for all of these? And I came up with, so in this story, the object of the mage's affection's name is Karis. She is the primordial of striving. And I came up with striving because I was like, every single living being strives to do something in some way, strives to meet the sun, strives to dig a hole, strives, and that's something that I felt was really powerful to think of in the context of it is a primordial urge. You can't be born and just sit there. You need something. You try to do something. You try to communicate. And so I came up with 3 others, which I won't talk about because they have their own stories in mind. But
Yay!
But it was really important to me to get across the sense of, like, this is a type of thing that everything can touch, regardless of whether you are human, whether you are an angel, whether you are any other being in these intersecting worlds. So it was really important to me. And it was actually a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun to read. It is a lot of fun to read, so it's obviously a lot of fun to write. And I want to see the rest of these stories that from these other gods out there in the world, so that I can read them. So I wish you good luck with that, and please let me know if you get them out there because I want to read them.
You got it.
All right, so we're going to move now to the part of the broadcast where we talk about other people's works, and we had the recommendation. Excuse me, I'm still getting over a cold. We had the recommendation of the story Great Mother Broth by Sarah Jackson, which appeared in Translunar Traveler's Lounge. And in the story, a troll named Hodril is lugging the body of her statuified sister back to the caldera where all trolls are shaped and born. Their mother joins her on this final voyage, and while Hodril didn't believe in the old stories of the Great Mother Broth anymore, each of them mourns in her own way, until the sunlight nearly claims their lives too. They're saved, strangely enough, by humans who shelter them in their tents throughout the day. And it's a story of coming to terms with loss. But at the same time, it's delightfully humorously written because they are so deep into the trolls' psyche and their culture and their language. They talk about grit and broth, and the broth is the mystical caldera sputum, basically, that emerges from the earth and lets them shape trollets out of the earth. And then that's how they have a child, because that's how the things just happen to work for them. And what did we like about this story, and what choices does it make in terms of world building as it shapes the troll religion? And what does the troll faith tell us about trolls and their worldview? And I'm going to take this back to Samantha.
Oh, this was so cute. So thank you for recommending, Rexa. I really liked. I guess we could talk about the end, right? Because we just talked about the whole thing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Go read it. Pause. Go read it. Okay. Come back. I really like the moment of connection with humans, which we get it completely from the perspective of the trolls. but they are in danger at the end, and humans assist them after seeing them performing this rite. And I thought it was a really beautiful moment of compassion, of
Yes.
seeing sentience in something that is extremely different, because you're recognizing that they also have rituals for loss. It would be, yeah, I just thought that was really beautiful.
I thought it was beautiful too. And Risa, what did you like about this story, and what choices does it make in terms of the world building that just tickled your fancy and made you recommend this one so highly?
I loved the fact that the main character didn't believe in any of this, and he was just doing it because his mom asked him to, and was like, "It's your sister, you gotta do it." And it's just like, okay, God. And I can't use that, but it's the same principle, right? Like,
broth.
broth. Yeah, exactly. It's this, and it's, all during the story, there's this internal narrative that the main character has with his sister who is dead, and how they both, the mother and the brother, deal with their own level of grief, deal with their grief and their loss in their religion and in their different levels of devotion to the broth.
And I will go so far as to say that I either completely misgendered the protagonist, or I misread completely. I thought that this was a female troll with a troll mother, and that they were just all a matrilineal society entirely. So I will have to go back and reread this.
I could be wrong.
I will have to go back and reread this. I'm not sure that it actually specifies. I think that it might be left to the imagination. I could be wrong, but we'll find out. Yeah. So great story. Again, it tells us a lot about the way the trolls view the world through their religion. It's not even a reincarnatory religion. It is giving back to the earth, because they take their dead back to the place where they were born, and they give themselves back to the broth, and presumably new trollets will come out of the people who have died. And that is a beautiful, wonderful circle of life type thing. And it's a gorgeously written story. Highly recommend. So now we're going to switch gears here a little bit, and we're going to have Risa read a little bit of her story, Delicate Situations. And we can talk a little bit more about that if you like. You are currently on mute, so you know. There you go.
A little bit of noise in the background. All right.
It happens.
Delicate Situations. 2 Guild Administrations. From Mage Shasar. Ascended. Primordial Relations. Subject. Request for Relationship Policy Revision. I'm writing to request an urgent revision of the Mages Guild's romantic relationship policy. I ask because Mage Devrin, 7th rank in primordial relations, has informed me that they will no longer work with Karis the Primordial of Striving. They plan to pursue a romantic relationship with her. We recognize that our policy only forbids relationships with a mage's current clients, but we believe it's critical to adhere to strict professional boundaries in order to better serve our clients and provide safe working conditions for our staff. Therefore, I strongly suggest we revise our policy to forbid romantic relationships with current and former clients. Thank you for your swift attention to this memo. To Guild Administration from Mage Pauline, Prime of the Guild Board. The subject, request for relationship policy revision. Do we really need to violate our existing policy procedure for this? Also, if Devrin is willing to forgo the significant commission for primordial work, who are we to stop them? Mage Shasar, Ascended Primordial Relations. From Mage Vestravel, Director, Assignments. Shasar, I do not understand your request. I specifically asked Devrin to notify you, and their behavior is in line with the professionalism and ethics of our organization. 2. Mage Vestravel, Director, Assignments. From Mage Shasar, Ascended Primordial Relations. Subject, request for relationship policy revision. If you assign Karis another mage and they're not as good as Devrin, she might blame us for a poor assignment. She might demand her gold back or might accuse us of deliberately undermining her work. CC Mage Pauline, Prime Guild Board. 2. Mage Chassar, Ascended, Primordial Relations. From Mage Vestravel, Director, Assignments. Subject, request for relationship policy revision. Assignments are my division, not yours. I am willing to take on both the risk and the responsibility. Also, Karis the Primordial has been working with us longer than you've been alive and has worked with many other mages. She is aware of the quality of our guild. CC Mage Pauline, Prime Client Relations. And I'm going to stop there because
I just go continuously more ridiculous as the time goes on. But as you're reading it so expressively, I'm sitting here cracking up and trying not to laugh over you so that people can actually hear you as you're reading.
I really wish this was online. This is in the anthology 99 Fleeting Fantasies, which is edited by Jennifer Brozek, and it's now on Amazon. So
nice. I will try to remember to get that link in there too, so people will be able to check that out. All right. Now we switch gears here a little bit and we talk about what you have coming out soon or out recently. And Samantha, you obviously have a novel coming out soon.
I do. That is the main thing because I spent all year working on it and didn't write other things. So now I'm trying to do other things. Yes, it's called The Wings Upon Her Back. It is out April 23rd, wherever books are sold.
I'm going to say one more thing about it, and this is, again, absolute praise, is the fact that you weave in some science into it as well, because the wings and the prosthetics that the mecha god gives to her followers, you have to have anti-rejection serums and medications so that you don't have your body completely reject the implants. And this is just a level of world building and detail that I so rarely get to see. And it addresses everything that would have got my bump of realism going, hey, this doesn't make sense. You've addressed before I even got there, which is just phenomenal. And I really want to read the rest of the book.
I love science fantasy. I love just being able to pick whatever I want from anywhere. Yes, it didn't come up as part of the religion topic, but part of the reason the nature of the gods is questionable is they don't just speak. Sometimes they give you schematics. They have bestowed great technology on this one very isolated city that feels very, very special because they're the only ones who have these gods and no one else has ever gotten blessed by them. Why are they over this city? Why are they giving them technological advancement as their gifts? It's a lot of
fun. Because, in the words of Terry Pratchett, that they wanted things to be instantly negotiable. Let's see. Coming out soon or out recently, Risa, what do you have that you would like to direct people's eyeballs to?
So Delicate Situations is my most recent release. Before that, I would love to point folks to the magazine Inner Worlds, which is actually edited by Sarah Jackson, who wrote Great Mother Broth. And my flash story, The View, is out in there. And that's free to read online.
Very nice. If you can pass me that link by email, I will make sure that is incorporated. And that is all we have time to talk about today. This is a shorter than average episode, so that's not a bad thing. We don't have to always drag on our topic until everybody is bored stiff and doesn't want to listen anymore. Thank you all for having been here. Seriously, it was a wonderful conversation, and I really enjoyed talking with both of you. Next week on Shining Moon, we'll be shifting gears to talk about writing real-world religions and fiction with Priya Shant, Robin Duncan, and Zohar Jacobs. Thank you all for having been here. Hit the like and subscribe buttons if you'd like to, and we are out.